Turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Genesis 1:26, and that's where we're going to begin. Bodhi, would you read it for us?
Yes.
Good.
Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, and the birds in the sky, over the livestock, of all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground."
Thanks so much. Well, today we are talking ethics, and particularly bioethics, and it's such a joy and pleasure to be with Dr. Abraham as we delve into this topic. The sad news is we only have 50 minutes, actually now 49, to talk into one of the most important and serious topics that are out there. And I'll start with an illustration. My wife, when we had our first child, we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, do you want to have amniocentesis done? And for those of you who are not familiar with amniocentesis, you withdraw some of the fluid from the amniotic sac to test for birth defects. And my wife asked this question. She said, so if in fact you find that there are birth defects, what would you be able to do for the child? And the doctor looked sort of puzzled and said, nothing. By the way, that is no longer true. That's something interesting in and of itself. And so she said to the doctor, well, then why would I do this test? And he said, so that you can abort it. And she said, I don't think so. She said, this child is a gift from God, and it's not plus or minus being a human based upon a birth defect. It's humanity. It's not based, and I'll use some language that I use in ethics, in its attributes. Its humanity is based in the fact that it's made in the image and likeness of God. And the doctor looked at her in a rather puzzled way, as if to say, what a fool. And I thought to myself, well done. Well done. By the way, the fact that you have a degree in anything doesn't make you an ethical specialist. And we only have to look to Dr. Joseph Mengele, that you may have heard of at Auschwitz, who was doing experimentation on twins, looking specifically to understand DNA. And so one might think that science and religion are totally separate. I do not think that way in any way, shape, or form. And I think just the opposite, that as a Christian, I value technology. Now, there is a certain point where I might be in the minority, in the sense that I think people fear technology. There's a certain sense in which that's understandable, because technology can do good and evil. Or to put it another way, it is the expression of human beings who seemingly have the capacity for good and seemingly have the capacity for evil. And so there are many glorious things that have occurred in technology, and as we are moving at a rapid speed, I'm just going to simply say most people, and definitely the church, does not seem to be able to keep up. It is for this reason that I want to congratulate you for going to college and for actually learning, because an intelligent response is better than an unintelligent response. An informed response is better than an uninformed response. So what we mean is to say this: arguments from technology are necessary and isn't easy, or to put it in simple ethics parlance, of course ethics are complicated. And what we're going to talk about today is complicated. But the reason that ethics is complicated is because human beings are complicated. And the ability to be creative is just another extension of the gifts that God has given us. If we are made in the image and likeness of God, then it stands to reason that we are creative. Whether we use that creativity properly and whether we understand the ethical implications is just another question. Years ago, there was a book written by a man named Alvin Toffler called The Third Wave. He correctly said that, in fact, technology was going to sweep humanity. And in fact, he wrote a book before that called future shock and the information age. He was 100% right. He was a prophet long before his time. All of that is true. But in his book, The Third Wave, he made a horrible mistake. And he said this: we must not allow morality to get in the way of technology. We must give technology free rein. I'm afraid he hasn't been paying attention to history. I'm afraid that that is quite an ignorant statement, because my Christian faith informs me that in fact humans don't always do what is good. And in fact, even inbred in their DNA itself is in fact a judgment from God as to the limitation of human beings. And even though we are looking into epigenetics and seeing if in fact we can elongate life, all the ethical questions that come with all of our technology and all our creativity do not just go by the wayside. For this reason, it is necessary for us to have talks like today, symposiums, information where people who will be the leaders for tomorrow are able to understand clearly their faith and the challenges that are before us. We are here today to talk about some of those challenges, particularly as it relates to what it means to be a human being. If in fact you are merely an accidental occurrence in a universe devoid of meaning, then the syllogism is clear: you have no meaning either. And the morality that you look for is merely an accommodation to practicality based upon a perspective of your own survival. And so the Christian position is that in fact that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and creativity is a part of our very nature. It is who that we are. And so we want to encourage, or at least I want to encourage, all of the areas of creativity that are out there, but never relegating morality to simply a footnote. We want to be creative. We want to be technologically accurate. We want to expand our horizons into quantum mechanics. We want to look deeply into what it means to be a human and how this all works. And never once would I stoop to the idea that in fact it's up to us to create our own morality. We are made in the image and likeness of God, and part of that is also as moral creatures. So today, as we begin to look into this deep and powerful topic, or I should say topics, you're going to see that science is moving at rapid speed and not necessarily being bothered with the questions of morality. And so that is the challenge, to allow the creativity that is within our sciences, and yet at the same time to not just simply have morality as a footnote. If we are to do that, then in fact, the prognosis is not good for the future. I'm going to ask Dr. Abraham if she would come up and lead us into a discussion, and then we'll take some questions of some of the most interesting and pertinent areas in bioethics.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. So Dr. Davis and I have been so blessed to actually combine our classes in the past several times, so we could actually have our students be thinking about scientific advances and ethical questions at the same time and ask good questions. So before I begin going over a few slides that I have prepared for you today, I just wanted to mention I'm no expert in CRISPR. I'm not currently doing any kind of genetic research. Neither am I an expert in fertility medicine and some of the other topics we're going to cover today. But my main goal is to kind of give you just an overview of all these advances that Dr. Davis was talking about that are just flying by at rapid speed. When Professor Armand initially asked us to do this, I was running some topics by him and he said, oh, this one looks great. Kind current issues in bioethics. So for all those who are outside of science, welcome. Thank you for being here this morning. I'm going to just go over a quick introduction of how bioethics emerged as a discipline and what it is about. So the word bioethics didn't even exist about 60 years ago. It was first coined by a physician, Van Potter, in a book that he wrote called Bridge to the Future. And he said that he proposes the term bioethics to emphasize the two most important ingredients in achieving the new wisdom that is so desperately needed. And these two fields were biological knowledge and human values. So it's the ethical or bioethics digs into the ethical use of medicine and technology and the impact of such developments for us as individuals, as a society, and part of a global community. So before I get into the topics, I just want to go over a couple of quick questions that we ask in bioethics. Bioethics attempts to ask these questions. What must we do? What should we permit? What can we tolerate? And what must we prohibit? So keep these questions in the back of your mind as we kind of survey a bunch of new advances in medicine and technology. I know that in the little blurb we sent out about what would be covered today, we narrowed down, we came down to 3 topics that we thought we would address. But I just wanted you to know there's so much out there in bioethics, so many different fields out there, and so this is just a quick snapshot in a grid view of all the many issues that we cover in bioethics. So bioethics has definitely grown as a discipline, but it seems like some of the topics of concern continue to be physician-assisted dying, physician-assisted suicide, they call it medical aid in dying in other places. Genetic enhancement using CRISPR-Cas, we are going to talk about it a little bit. Treating incompetent patients at the end of life, those are some big questions. And they're great questions for us as believers too. So thinking about how we view eternal life. What should our posture be when we're faced with big end-of-life decisions? Because end of life now has become more of a decision that you would make than just a discovery that you made in the past where you came across someone and they were already dead. Now it's become a matter of when should we withdraw life support and how long should we wait before we decide it is time. Abortion, of course, assisted reproductive technologies, embryos, stem cells, cloning, and then treating impaired neonates with severe disabilities, and of course organ allocation and transplantation. So for those of you who've taken one of our classes, you probably addressed all of these, and for those who are yet to take our class, we'll dive into these topics in greater detail there. But it seems that today, in our current day and age, we are now in bioethics 2.0. So we went from asking, when does human life begin? When does it end? Does quality of life matter? Are all human beings entitled to special value and dignity? What does this entail? To moving to how it's affecting us now at a global level. So now we're talking about CRISPR that was already done, and there were 2 babies born as a result of CRISPR, and like, what do we do about it now? So we're at that stage now. So the challenges of bioethics 2.0 force us now to begin asking the same question that Dr. Davis started us with this morning, and that is, what does it mean to be human? So I have a bunch of links to great videos, but I'm not going to play the videos today. But I just want to show you real quick that CRISPR-Cas9 is a gene editing tool whereby a gene could be deleted and then your gene of interest could be inserted. So in its simplistic form, that's how it works. But you're probably wondering where we are today with CRISPR and its use in medicine. I will talk about the scientist who went ahead, unknown to the rest of the world, and went ahead and actually edited 2 human embryos. We'll talk about that later. But we want to start with some current updates. So all of these diseases listed here on the left they're all being researched research using CRISPR, and they're all in clinical trials. So you can see some of them have moved on to phase 3, a bunch of them are still in phase 1 of clinical trials. And so I thought this was really interesting. So I'm going to share 2 details with you, not this slide, but this slide. It's interesting what Jennifer Doudna, who initially discovered CRISPR, had to say. And so one of the founders of this company has said now, CRISPR is curative. 2 diseases down, 5,000 to go. So the 2 diseases down, we're going to talk about it on the next slide in a moment. But then the ethical questions that remain is this: what is to be done as CRISPR and other biotechnologies and synergistic interactions with AI, neurotechnology, and nanotechnology are raising the possibility of almost anyone having godlike powers? This is perhaps the most ethically challenging security problem. And so sometimes it seems like the more we discover, we're left with more questions to find answers to. And so this is definitely one of those questions. So I want to show you or tell you about 2 diseases that have made it through the trials, and they've been now, so these medicines are out there. But one of the first disease that CRISPR was, I guess I can't think of the word, but it was approved to use is in a hemoglobinopathy. And so in all the patients who receive this medicine, Casgevy, it basically edits the gene that, or turns on the gene that makes more of fetal hemoglobin. So let me show you a graph, and then I'll come back to the slide. So what they have found that in sickle cell disease patients, symptoms of sickle cell disease actually start to show after fetal hemoglobin levels drop. And what they have found is that using CRISPR to turn the gene back on sort of helps with this. So this is how CRISPR has now been approved to be used through the medicine called Casgevy, where without directly repairing the mutations, this treatment seems to be the functional cure for sickle cell disease. The other disease that they've been investigating is transfusion-dependent beta thalassemia. And so what they found with this particular disease using CRISPR is that 25 of the 27 individuals were no longer now transfusion dependent following the treatment, some for longer than 3 years. The other 2 patients had reductions in transfusion frequency, and so 16 of 17 CSD, which is sickle cell disease patients, are free of the vaso-occlusive crisis that characterize the illness following treatment. So those are the 2 current diseases that have been approved as a result of clinical trials for the use of CRISPR. So that's just an update that I wanted to share. But then I don't have time to go into all of these, but you'll just see that as I pull up what's been in the headlines over the past couple of months, you'll see that we have more and more questions that we're asking about the ethical use of CRISPR in medicine. So again, no time to go over all of these, but I just wanted to share that bioethics.com or cbhd.org are 2 reliable websites that have a lot of updates in news, bioethics news. So I'm going to move on. How many of you guys had heard about this? The scientist who actually used CRISPR and we had those babies born. So Jiankui, went to prison for actually creating the world's first genetically engineered babies. And so this was back in 2002. He has since been released and he's even presented at conferences. But his initial goal in using CRISPR was to generate HIV-resistant kids, because the dad was HIV positive, and by using CRISPR, his goal was to induce germline mutations that would help with the babies of these parents. So in other words, we've had the world's first CRISPR babies already born. I honestly, I don't know how they're doing now. That's a question that always comes up. How are those kids doing now and where are they? I don't have those details. But so we have a lot more news on CRISPR. CRISPR has been tested in correcting trisomy 16 in a human embryo. So I have some pictures here and images to show that. So this is just to kind of bring to your attention the rapid kind of explosion in the field of biotechnology using CRISPR as a molecular tool. So I'm going to move on now to another topic that I'd like to talk about. And that, oh, actually, before we move on, let's talk about some scientific and ethical questions that CRISPR brings up. So one, there's a question about safety. That is, when we actually fix a gene or edit a gene, there's a question of off-target effects occurring with cells that you didn't want the edits to be in, and also mosaicism. That is, do all the cells resulting from that cell actually acquire or inherit the corrected gene? So we have that question. Do the benefits outweigh the risk? That's always a good question to ask. And then we get into the issues of, if we allow CRISPR to be used to cure medical diseases, is it going to give rise to a slippery slope eventually for its use in non-therapeutic and for enhancement purposes? Now, just because we have the tool, CRISPR, do we have a moral imperative now to use it to treat all of those 5,000 diseases that we have in the list? What about questions of informed consent? Because you're tweaking human embryos, at least that's what the scientists did. They did not have a chance to give their informed consent, and so there's always that question. Justice and equity is another big question. So I forgot to mention that with Casgevy, that was approved to treat sickle cell disease, the cost is $2 million per patient. So eventually, if we approve these, even though they are life-transforming cures, you can say, is it going to be available and accessible to all? Is going to be a question. And then finally, if we prohibit CRISPR, what is our cost of missed opportunity? That's always a question we ask in bioethics. By stopping research on stem cells or on CRISPR, what's the cost we're paying for missed opportunities to cure tons and tons of diseases? So those are some good ethical considerations to ask with CRISPR. Now I'm going to jump to a topic that we love talking about in bioethics, which is assisted reproductive technologies. And on this slide, you're looking at a beautiful electron micrograph of the surface of a human egg, and at around 50 at least human sperm that have arrived at the surface of the human egg. So we've gone from just having or being in total awe of the natural process of birth to now having options that people can choose from in deciding how they want to have a baby. But you have to understand that a lot of these come from couples who are infertile, who've been trying desperately to have a baby, and they're willing to go to any length to have a baby. So while we don't have time today to run through all the scenarios, this is a market that has grown into something called reproductive tourism. People are globetrotters now, and they travel from one country to the other just because the cost of having or having someone have your baby in another country is so much cheaper, and it's kind of become a big market, reproductive tourism. So while preparing for this talk, I came across this and I thought it was so interesting. So this was just in the news a couple of days ago, but I forget where this is. It might be in Australia. But they tried this. They tried to have the world's first baby born by IVF, which was carried out entirely by a machine. So you're typically thinking of human, embryologists, scientists who are in the lab, who are looking at the sperm, looking at the egg under the microscope, and they're making sure they're fertilized. But in this particular news release, what they did was they had a machine control 23 different steps. leading to a successful fertilization, and then the baby was actually born. So this is just a news update I want to share that we've not considered before. So an AI was a part of it because, as you'll see, in one step, the machine uses an AI model to select the healthiest sperm cells for fertilization based on their appearance. And in another, the machine immobilizes the sperm by zapping the tails of the sperm with a laser so they're easy to pick up. But what was so unique about this press release was with minimal human supervision from just a computer, they had a machine perform all of these steps. And then they eventually transferred that embryo and the baby was born. So that's pretty interesting. And then something that was in the news, there's a video which I don't have a chance to play.
How are your wellness and health?
But there was a shocking IVF mix-up with, after the mom giving birth, she found out that the baby was not hers. And then they found that it belonged to another couple. So this is big news in Australia. And we've had several other instances like that happen recently. But some of the questions we ask about IVF are just questions related to the personhood of the human being. Now, we have 5 million human embryos stored in freezers around the world. Okay, and if embryos are persons and if they have inherent worth and dignity, absolute worth and dignity, why are we so silent about them? What are we doing about them? And then in related news, in this past week, we had the first baby born in the UK to a woman with a transplanted womb. So I shared this update in my class, we watched the whole video, but it was basically a sister, so the sister of this woman who, from whom they removed the uterus and transplanted it into her sister so she could have her own baby using her sister's uterus. I hope this is making sense. And so the baby was born, and there's a picture of both ladies, both sisters with their newborn baby. So pretty cool, and this is kind of the first that we've heard about, but I think there have been at least 100 babies born from transplanted wombs. So it's around the world. This was the first baby born in the UK. So some of the ethical questions that this brings up is assisted reproduction pro-life? So when you assist someone with reproduction that is not through the natural means, is that pro-life? Since 1 in 11 couples in North America can't conceive after 1 year of trying, and if they want to have babies versus actually aborting a baby, what's wrong with them using IVF or assisted reproduction to have babies? Even if some tiny embryos are lost in the process of trying to conceive, which by the way also occurs for 50% of embryos conceived through normal sexual relations, what's wrong with couples wanting to have their own children and using medical science to try to have them? How can such desires not be pro-life? So those are a few of the many questions we talk about and address, definitely not easy to answer. And then I want to just show you a quick picture of Louise Joy Brown, who was the world's first IVF baby born in the year 1978. And this is Louise now with her own family. So this is her own child. So back then it was big news, but today we consider it very normal. I've had students in my class stand up and share with the rest of the class that they're an IVF baby. One of my students said, I'm one of triplets and we were all conceived through IVF. So today IVF is very normal and acceptable. And then the last issue I want to talk about for a little bit is that relating to physician-assisted dying. I'm actually going to share something that was in the news this past week. So this is just interesting. So this is a California man who invited a BBC journalist to actually witness his death through PAD because it's legal in California. And so there's a whole article about it, and you can read the journalist's perspective on all of this, but this is the gentleman. and he had all his medication waiting, and this journalist even asked him that morning, are you sure today's the day you want to die? And he said, yes, I'm very sure about it, I've thought about it. But physician-assisted dying applies to terminally ill patients who have been given 6 months to live, and they are the only ones eligible in the states that have legalized PAD to be prescribed a lethal dose, a lethal medication. And so just to give you a perspective of where we are here in the US, all of the ones in red are the states where it's legalized, and I think New Hampshire is next on the list as the 11th state to, they're about to legalize PAD. So I'm going to stop here because we want to hear your questions and we want to have some good discussions. And I know I ran through these very quickly, but we would love to discuss and answer your questions now. Any questions you have about any of the topics that were addressed or topics outside of these that are bioethics related. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abraham. Thanks so much. Yeah, go ahead and give her a round of applause. Okay, nobody's asking questions. All right, I'll start us off a little bit then. Recently, my father died, talking about physician-assisted suicide. He was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's disease, so he was given a severe diagnosis, meaning that in fact mental impairment was significant. The interesting thing about this was my father had hidden his dementia quite well. He was a sharp fellow in the sense that he was in fact former CEO of a company, and his social skills very, very sharp, his emotional IQ very sharp. When we went to the hospital after he had a seizure, there was all sorts of confusion as to what actually caused the seizure. We got 4 different prognoses as to what caused the seizure. Okay, it's not an exact science, I get that. The problem that occurred is a lady came in and her specialty was hospice care, I guess you could say. And so she began to talk to us about what did we want to do about my father's continued living. I thought it a very strange question. Did my father have some mental capacity? Actually, quite a bit. There was never a time, in fact, prior to his death, that he did not recognize the people he was talking to. There were some issues so far as his recall. True, there was some impairment. However, his quality of life was still very apparent, and there was no question that he wanted to live. He had signed and gone into great depth, probably because he was a pretty sharp fellow, as to when to, in quotes, pull the plug. We were not at that point. But my brother and I had power of attorney. And so basically, the doctor, medical doctor, came in and encouraged us to shorten his life. I was stunned at the manner in which this all occurred. I really thought to myself, who are you to tell my father and my brother and I that he should end his life? By the way, from an economic standpoint, my father had lots of money. And that meant it wasn't as if he couldn't pay the bills either. Truthfully, he was going to be paying the bills for other people who were coming to the hospital. Sorry. And so when this question was given to me, I thought it quite inappropriate, and I thought it to be callous, and I was amazed that we had come to this point where we were talking about killing someone who wanted to live and was enjoying life. That's the point. I was shocked at this. To be sure, it was a terminal prognosis. There was going to be a point where he died. But terminal doesn't mean today. And so one of the issues that we come up with in talking about end of life is, are we looking at a culture where your value is totally based on your function? If that's the way it is, then the implications are profound. Let me say it again. Are we moving towards a culture where your value is based upon your function? By the way, since we're PhDs, we're sort of liking it. We're like, okay, that works for us. Okay? But will it work for us as we get older? At what point? Who makes the call? Of course, the flip side of this is designer babies. Creating a designer baby based upon what the culture believes to be valuable. Should people be allowed to abort children in IVF based solely upon whether they're male or female? Now it's interesting because I think a lot of people would say that's sexism. No, it's consumerism. You get to choose because you're paying the bill. So when we're looking at these things, this is why I was saying, you know, it isn't like this is a moral-free zone. Absolutely not. And even with the idea of CRISPRing, of course, Dr. Abraham talked about it in the sense of, well, there's a good and bad to this. And one of the things that's hard to grab hold of is we are experimenting with the effects of the change whenever we change something. Now, truthfully, I'm sure there's lots of times you'd be willing to roll the dice, okay? And then there's the other idea. To what degree do we allow consumerism to actually impact gene editing? Will we want to create superhumans? There's a little bit of a fatalism in my thinking, if I may be honest, as it relates to this area, like with the doctor who created a CRISPR child. I'm just not sure how much we can stop it even if we wanted to. But I think that there's a whole bunch of things going on right now. And probably the best defense morally is what we're doing right now, information. Having people informed as to the moral consequences of what's going on. Go ahead.
So in like graduate healthcare education, we teach students to always evaluate risk-benefit of patient care. What is the risk? What is the benefit? And so we're kind of always, you know, when a student's presenting to me, they're like, I think we should start them on this. I'm like, all right, what are the risks? What are the benefits? You know, making sure that we're always kind of having that conversation. And I think that focus or that lens of thinking may be one of the contributors to your skewed perception, the skewed perception of is our value based off of our function, right? Because now we're looking, what is the risk of life, and then what are the benefits of life? And I think that may be the subconscious thoughts of the provider. How do we practice good medicine, but also challenge that to where we're looking at our patients and not thinking about value of life versus risk in a risk-benefit lens? I'm not sure I worded that well.
It's a very good question.
Okay.
I'll let Dr. Abraham answer it, but I would simply say part of your question is how do we get the subjective out of the subject?
Yeah, I feel that.
Dr. Abraham.
No, I agree with what you're saying, that whole premise of evaluating the cost-benefit analysis is contributing to, that's how we look at everything, is what are we getting out of this, and how can we minimize the risks, but it's not really helping us to think about the deeper questions. Is this the right thing to do? At what cost? Yeah.
And then sorry.
Oh, were you finished?
Well, I was gonna say, I guess then right becomes subjective based off of your provider's morality.
Well, there's where the problems come in.
Mhm.
And this is the issue with the amniocentesis. The doctor was basically trying to trump my wife's morality with his. And he was effectively saying, this is stupid. And she was effectively saying, actually my logic is better than yours. And which of course I thought was beautiful. How? I think that the bioethics classes that are a part of our education are part of it, and I think too. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. Information, knowledge is power, and I think part of the issue that we always come up against is that in fact people are voting in our society on issues of life and death, like we're talking about right here, as to the ability to do that. And even Dr. Jack Kevorkian is a perfect example of physician-assisted suicide. He starts out with terminal cases, but by the time he's done, he's more than willing to help someone die who is suffering from depression. And so then it becomes very, very subjective. It's just, is it okay for the individual to take their life based upon their moral views? And then it comes down to the state. And there's repercussions, and that's part of what I was talking about with the culture of this woman coming to us saying, I really think that you ought to kill your dad. And just being shocked. Why would you even say that? I know why from a biological standpoint. He's going to die. Let's get it over with. And this is not something that's happening in some sci-fi fiction. This is happening in a hospital in North Carolina, where my father was being attended to. And interesting enough, not only did he get out of the hospital bed, he had a very, very healthy life up until 6 months before he was going to pretty much crash for dementia. He was going to be very bedridden, very, very little communication. So these thoughts that we're talking about, I think the best way is a informed public if they're voting. If a public is voting, then they need to be informed. And the more information, the better. Yeah, that's an example, if I may say so, to be critical. And not that I'd ever wish to be that, but here we go. We have removed ethics from the general education core. Interesting. And so, an informed public can make better decisions. As a pastor, I got asked questions about IVF. It is not a moral-free zone. Am I for it? Absolutely, I'm for it. But if you're asking me, is it a moral-free zone? No. So it's a hard question, but I think that in the end, education is our best resource. Leroy.
Yeah, recently I just saw a news article on, I don't know if you've seen it yet or not, about the dire wolf. Where
Yes,
the
of course.
individual has just
Yeah.
created a dire wolf, which is extinct 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, he's saying, well, the next thing we were looking at is a woolly mammoth. And I mean, it sounds almost like Jurassic Park kind of stuff,
Yeah.
but he's actually doing it. I mean, and so it really
Well, yes and no. I'll let Dr. Abraham. It's not exactly as it appears.
Yes, it's not as it appears, and
Okay.
there's a really good scientific articles on it. So I have to start with this. The first thing they haven't done is actually published their research in a peer-reviewed scientific journal.
Okay.
So right now we're just relying on all the pictures that we get and all the press releases. So the first scientific criticism is they have not actually brought back the dire wolf from extinction because they only edited, I think it's 20 genes of the gray wolf that they think are dire wolf, but no, they are dire wolf genes that they brought from a bone from a museum somewhere.
Right.
And so those are the only genes, those 20 genes that they have put into a gray wolf embryo, and now and we have those wolves. So they're calling them dire wolf, but they're wolves, but they're not 100% dire wolves. So that's one.
Well, they're not even close.
Yeah, they're not even close.
Yeah.
Secondly, the big ethical question is this: just because we have the ability to bring animals back from extinction, should we? So ecologically, that raises a whole host of questions about if we keep proceeding like this and just bringing back the woolly mammoth and the dire wolves, do we have the environment to support them, and what's going to happen to all the other animals and the ecosystem around them? Are they going to be, like, how is it going to affect the ecosystem? So there's a lot of questions, but I'm actually very pleased to see the criticism that this news release has received in the scientific community, because everyone's like, hold on, we're not brought back the dire wolf. This is not, we're nowhere close to bringing back this dire wolf from extinction.
Yeah, I think a total misrepresentation.
Yeah, misrepresentation.
There was a gray wolf, and they focused on the genes that believed, okay, to be inherited from a dire wolf. So it isn't like we got a dire wolf from some DNA of a dire wolf. That's not true. Okay. What occurred is you have a gray wolf, and the belief is the way to say it, that there's some similarity, or that it in fact has evolved from the dire wolf, the gray wolf, was focused on within the gray wolf. So it is a modification of a gray wolf.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
It's basically a gray wolf with a few dire wolf genes. And here's one more thing I want to say. The assumption when they say statements like that, as we brought back the dire wolf, is that just by recreating all the genes, you're recreating the ancestor. And that is scientifically inaccurate. We know we're not simply a sum of all our genes, we're more than that. So I read an article yesterday which was so interesting, because they talked about, even if we were to do this and you brought back the dire wolf, you cloned all the genes and it is pure dire wolf, a lot of what animals learn behavior-wise are from what they emulate and watch their parents do, and we won't have that scenario happening. So even if they are genetically dire wolf, are they going to behave like dire wolves ecologically? And that was a really good question too.
As a matter of fact, it's a dire question.
Yes.
A couple of things. One, it kind of sounds like the way y'all are describing this popped in my head is it's a replica, and it's like if you make a movie replica of a prop or something, where it's not the original, but we're trying to make it like the original. So anyway, that popped in my head the way y'all were describing how they made the dire
close,
wolf.
But truthfully, I think they've taken great liberty.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So a couple things I wanted to tell, just because I thought this kind of fit what was going on, was years ago I had a student who ended up being valedictorian, and I actually got pretty close to him. I still am in contact with him. He told me once that his parents were encouraged to abort him because they said he had Down syndrome. And he ended up valedictorian, and he ended up going into math and physics and has doctorates in mathematics. Very bright guy. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting, so I was wondering your thoughts on that. Another thing was, you said something about natural means for birth, and I kind of wanted to hear you define natural. And then my last thing, if there's even time here, you talked about the like genetically curing someone with sickle cell, and then you had up there about equity and justice, and I was wondering your thoughts on that. Like, if it can't be available to everybody, should it be available to nobody? Like, does equity mean justice, or are they separate things? So that was a lot, sorry,
They are
but...
separate things. They are separate things. But going back to your question, we haven't done that with IVF.
Mhm.
Most of the insurances don't cover fertility treatments, any of them, like IVF. And there are a few, but not all. But we haven't said that if we can't cover it for everyone, then no one should have access. We've not done that. So we're not following justice there, clearly. But for this purpose, are you referring to IVF or ARTs or CRISPR?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Just the thing where you said it was like $2 million to cure someone of
Yeah.
sickle cell, and like
Yes.
I think that was what you were talking about at the time.
Yes. Usually what happens over time is those costs will be reduced, but I don't know how long and how much. But generally, when it's a new discovery like that, your medicine is going to be very expensive.
Right. So I guess if it stays very expensive, should it be? I would guess I was just more asking your opinion on it because you put that up there about the equity of it as a question we have to ask, and I wanted more information. Like, what do you mean by that? What kind of a question do we have to ask? Should we?
I'll ask you a question back. Who should decide that?
I don't
That's a
know.
really good question. But who do you think should be making those decisions and answering those questions?
I don't know.
Well, it even gets more complicated when we talk about extending life.
Mm-hmm.
And there is research for genetically extending life. And I frankly think that is going to occur. I, again, sometimes feel very like this is what's going to occur. We can say we don't like it, but I think that it will occur. How will that work? I think it is true that it'll be very similar with IVF, that in fact, those who can pay for it will get the benefit of it. And that brings a larger, bigger question of to what degree should medicine be available to all?
Mm-hmm.
And so if in fact we can extend life, even, let's put it this way, I don't mean to freak everybody out, but I sort of like doing it. Anyway, if we can extend life by 10 years just in the United States, that will bankrupt Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
And so my admonition is that all of you who are below the age of 30 do work 2 to 3 jobs, if you don't mind, for those of us who are nearing Social Security age. I really appreciate that.
Have you ever seen the movie In Time?
In
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 Time,
time, yes.
where they have the clocks on their arms and like it's how much
It's time for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had people with like millions of years and other people that only had like an hour
In
left and
fact,
stuff.
I think, I hate to be pessimistic, but I think that will, not the clock, but I think that the longevity is going to be something one purchases. To a certain degree, it is already.
Yeah.
Okay, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I went to an area in Africa, in Nigeria, where 6,000 people, we set up medical clinics, had never had any form of medicine at all. So to a certain degree,
Right.
it is already.
And how healthy of a food you can afford and stuff too already affects that.
100%, the
Yeah.
drinking water itself, so.
And
sorry.
just last thing was natural.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So if a couple doesn't have is unable to have a baby after 1 year of trying,
Mm-hmm.
they're considered infertile. So natural would mean trying on your own without any assistance through sexual intercourse and not being able to have a baby. I mean, if you're able to have a baby, then you're not infertile. But if you've tried for a year and you haven't succeeded, then you're considered infertile, which is where ARTs come in, all the forms of assisted reproductive technologies.
And those are what you're considering unnatural. Is that
Yeah,
It's
when
assisted.
you're using
At that
any
point.
form of assistance
okay?
to have
It's
a
a
baby.
little bit of a stretch on the term.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because really what we're talking about is technologically assisted,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Yeah.
However, as I like to say in ethics, the only person that can make the argument against technology is the nudist sitting under a tree, hoping that fruit falls and never
Mm-hmm.
using a stick to move it.
Right. And if we have our brains and we're considering, and we're making this stuff up, then I guess that was always kind of what bothered me is what considered natural, because if our brains aren't natural, then
course.
anything they produce should be natural as well. So,
Yeah, it's a bad argument.
You know what I mean?
The
Like
argument that we should not use technology for reproduction, I have no idea why that is considered to be a good argument. I just think it's a bad argument.
thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, is healthcare a right? Like a human right?
That's an excellent question. You want to hit it or you? I would say yes. I would say it is a human right, that healthcare is a human right. For example, you go to the emergency room, they're not going to say, I'm sorry, we're not treating you. They are going to treat, I think it is a human right. The complicated thing is what we're talking about now. So you need $2 million See, the problem with that idea is, well, who pays? That's the issue. So all of the stuff that we're looking at, fabulous, absolutely. I think it's amazing. I think it's totally cool. The question is who pays? Somebody's going to pay. And that's really the question as to who pays.
I have a quick quote to go along with that from Walter Williams,
Okay.
where he said, if you are to have the right to something you did not produce, it necessarily means somebody else does not have the right to something they did produce.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of tricky with that whole question of what she's asking
Yeah.
then too. Can you force a doctor to perform stuff he doesn't want to?
I mean, it's like
Oh, there's plenty
Or
of
play
states
for it,
telling
or
doctors
pay for it,
that,
yeah.
I'll tell you that. There's
Yep.
plenty of states saying that.
Yep.
I think to go back to your equity and justice question, I think Delaware and New Hampshire both, if you have an insurance policy through an organization from those states, they cover assisted reproductive technology, but it is equitable amongst any married couple, which is why gay marriage was a a voted policy there, because they wanted to offer ART to the LGBT community as well. So I think when we're having those conversations, you have to look at politics in that conversation as well. Until we get frustrated, we're like, oh, I wish this was more accessible. There's risks and benefits, there's pros and cons to everything, and so yeah, those are my 2 cents.
I mean, truthfully, I find this whole area totally cool. Not just assisted reproduction per se, but just the whole idea of being able to, and Dr. Abraham and I, we were very proud of this. When I first came here, she and I were talking about something that did not actually make the news until 5 years later, and that was the ability to reprogram cells to a pluripotent
Induced pluripotent
Yeah.
stem cells.
truthfully, that hasn't really been tapped into as quickly as I thought it would be, but there's so many cool things that can occur
Yeah.
with that, and we're already doing some of them in stem cells. No question, that's going to just explode, and just interesting stuff.
I just have a real quick comment off Dr. Hudson. I think this for students and for us, I think that's why policy really matters. I know we talk about, we've said a little bit about politics and how we vote, but really policy matters where you work, and then like even our participation in policy, or if you feel inclined, if you want justice, sometimes you have to put yourself in the seat to help exercise justice. And so like even when we're talking about, I think someone was talking about, like you were talking about your father's care. A friend of mine has a daughter with Down syndrome, went to a local practice, she had this severe medical decline, swelling on her hip, and all they were concerned about was her vaccinations. Are vaccinations necessary? They could be, yes they are. But it wasn't, but that policy, I believe, is what caused that practitioner to be more focused on what was absent in her medical record than care for her physical decline, but also her diagnosis of Down syndrome, and going back to the concept of what we do, and is there value in that person because of what they will or will not produce that we have a crystal ball and can tell, or are they
It's a very slippery slope as soon as you start defining function as value.
Right.
Because some people are more functional than others, and then which is of value? Is it high IQ? Is it emotional IQ? The idea of function is a little bit frightening. By the way, since we're talking ethics, the first group that Hitler began to eliminate was not the Jews. It was the disabled. And so that's the point. If you're going to start eliminating based upon function, I see. How's that going to work?
Hey, Dr. Davis. First of all, sorry about your loss. And,
Thank you so
and
much.
also, I'm sorry that you and your family had to experience the impact of that doctor removing sensitivity, humanism, and partnering with you and helping you get through that time. And you're right, it should have been more of an informed discussion instead of a dictation. And informing you and your wife, this is what we're looking at. This is what's possibly to come. These are your choices. And I think that's tough. And today, in the healthcare field that I see, a lot of that is being stripped. The power of the client is being stripped. And in my healthcare with my patients, is empowering them. You have the patients that don't want to listen to the doctors, and you have the patients that whatever you say, I'll do. And they're both not good. I would tell my patients, make sure you understand what the doctor's saying. Do you know what that means? Are you educated? Are you informed? So, it's a great point that you brought up, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it was condescending, rude, and unbelievable that this was actually occurring. And I felt like telling her, actually my father, despite his decline, still enjoys seeing his children, his grandchildren, being with them. And I'm just not really sure why you are so eager to off him. How much time we got? Zero, okay. All right. Thank you all so much.